Hello and welcome to the Jigsaw Education Group webinar about introducing and embedding a worldviews approach to RE. My colleague Laura and I will take you through what it is and how you can introduce it in your school. Whether you are joining us live or watching this as a recording, we'd really appreciate it if you took just a minute or two to complete the pre-training survey, either using the QR code or the website you can see on the screen there. This really helps us to make sure that the training we provide is meeting your needs. My name is Sarah, and along with my colleague Laura, I'll be guiding you through today's webinar. So at Jigsaw RE, we believe that RE is a vitally important component of children's personal, social and spiritual development. Developing an understanding of their own and others' worldviews underpins the growth of empathy and respect. Appreciating that we all see the world through the lens that has been formed by our experiences, upbringing, culture, etc., and that this influences our decision making and our own way of seeing the world is just so valuable. So in Jigsaw RE, we're treating all the worldviews studied as equally valid and valuable. Hence, we refer to both religious and non-religious standpoints as worldviews, so as not to imply preference or differentiate unfairly. We've taken a worldviews approach because it is far more inclusive and relevant to all children. It supports critical thinking and multidisciplinary skills. That told you a little bit about the why we at Jigsaw RE think a worldviews approach is so important. And so this is the what we will be looking at today. So in this webinar, we're going to introduce the worldviews approach, exemplify what that actually looks like in the classroom, and suggest ways to introduce it to other staff in your school and to pupils.
So what is a worldviews approach? Let's start by looking at some of the terminology that we might use when we're talking about worldviews and a worldviews approach. These are shared to ensure that in your school you have a shared understanding of that terminology. This comes into play particularly when we're thinking about the difference between individual and personal worldviews. So the organised, which can sometimes be known as the institutionalised worldviews, are those structured belief systems. So the example here is humanism. This also includes different denominations and groupings. So in Christianity, examples would be Anglican or Catholicism or Methodism. Then individual and personal worldviews have sometimes been used interchangeably, but we are suggesting here playing on the differences between the two to distinguish the individual worldviews being those that the children are going to learn about as the individual interpretations people have when they align themselves with a particular organised worldview. And therefore the personal worldview, we're talking more about the pupils and their worldviews, whether they be religious or non-religious. So we have that underpinning philosophy of everybody has a worldview. When taking a worldviews approach, we want to really ground our learning and start with the individual worldview, so with people and with context, and then relate those everyday beliefs and experiences to the organised or institutionalised worldview. Throughout that learning journey, we want the pupils in our classrooms to be developing their personal worldview by reflecting on how they interpret the content that you are covering and the impact it has on them. The worldviews approach moves the subject forward from the world religions paradigm. These images represent that move, so that the world religions paradigm can lead to our boxing up of ideas about what each religion is, that there's a tick list of what it means to be a Christian or a Muslim, and so we're at risk of promoting stereotypes, generalizations, misconceptions about the individuals who are identifying with that organised worldview and the diversity that there is within that. So you can see the image here of a worldviews approach recognises the messiness of religion and worldviews in a modern, pluralistic world. It recognises that religious and non-religious worldviews are complex, diverse and plural, and they pull together within the intersectionality of the individuals. So when we're interpreting what a worldviews approach is or could be in our schools, we might start to panic and think that we need to include more breadth. through a wider range of worldviews and denominations and groupings. But actually, like other curriculum subjects, a good worldviews approach will promote depth of understanding, and we need to be brave about being selective with the stuff, with the content, so that you have time to add that depth and think about the so what. And that so what depth is where we really truly unlock the power of a worldviews approach. As Ofsted highlighted in their 2024 subject report, a superficially broad curriculum does not always provide pupils with the depth of knowledge that they require for future study. Therefore, a worldviews approach is about what we do with the stuff or the breadth to add that depth to create the deep and meaningful and impactful learning. We do not need to add more content. You could replace content or adapt it, but this is not about simply adding more. The challenge here is in entering that ongoing reflective approach to curriculum to update and adapt our approach to the content, so the way in which we teach the what, the underpinning that aligns to kind of that wider curriculum aim for the impact that RE can have on our young people, and therefore the way that we allocate time and purpose to the classroom activities we do in RE.
There are also some misconceptions about a worldviews approach, so we just wanted to summarise what it is and isn't. It's a guiding principle to selecting content and planning your teaching and learning approaches. It's really a different way of approaching RE. It's not about adding anything more to your heavily packed curriculum. It recognises plurality within a worldview and exploring how and why this has come about. It's about giving value to worldviews as they are in themselves rather than comparing them to others. It includes learning about a range of non-religious beliefs. Humanism is a great starting point as there's defined beliefs, but it's really important that pupils don't think anyone without a belief in God is going to be a humanist. Key to it is it's centred on people, context and lived experiences. And also there's a strong element of personal development. We're supporting pupils to reflect on how their learning impacts their own worldview and vice versa. The move towards the worldviews approach has been going on in the RE world for almost a decade now, really. But to put that into context, the transition to a world religions model back in the late 1980s took over 15 years. One key document you might like to take a look at is the Core Report, Commission on RE, which was published in 2018, called Religion and Worldviews, The Way Forward. And in talking about the purpose of RE, they said the subject should explore the important role that religious and non-religious worldviews play in all human life. This is an essential area of study if pupils are to be well prepared for life in a world where controversy over such matters is pervasive, and where many people lack the knowledge to make their own informed decisions. It's a subject for all pupils, whatever their own family background and personal beliefs and practices. So here we have the idea that RE should be inclusive and that a key purpose of it is to develop people's religious literacy so they can take an informed part in our modern multicultural society. And here we're going to take a look at another key document. This is the Research Review in RE published by Ofsted in 2021. And in this section, it's really looking at how a worldviews approach is much more authentic and nuanced than the world religions model, which had a tendency towards generalizations and stereotypes. Subject leaders also need to be alert to the ways in which the authenticity of traditions can be lost. Sometimes subject leaders plan for pupils to learn generalizations. For example, Christians believe or Islam is. This becomes problematic when the planned representations give the impression that traditions are given, fixed and stable, and do not attend to the fluidity, change and dynamism of living traditions as traditions in transition. It's crucial that subject leaders plan well-informed representations that do not present pupils with unsustainable stereotypes and poor generalizations.
Let's look at some examples now of the things that could be done to move towards a worldviews approach, so what that might look like practically in your schools. We're going to look at general examples and aims using exemplars of how we have built this into Jigsaw RE. We will consider this from the perspective of the curriculum and design, the staff and the children. So starting with curriculum, some of the elements that will create a worldviews approach are a spiral curriculum to enable that depth of knowledge and diversity within worldviews. For example, introducing a concept and then returning to it from a different perspective. As I spoke about before, being selective about the breadth to allow for the depth in curriculum planning and classroom time. Considering the progression of non-religious worldviews. So learning is about non-religious worldviews is not just a one-off that's been added as a tick, that has the same progression. And building learning around opportunities to interact with the lived experience of worldviews, which will include trips out and visitors in, but also presenting learning as case studies to hear authentic voices. I'm going to circle through some more strategies for a worldviews approach that you might choose to focus on. So this one, an inquiry approach, also supports a worldviews approach. So questions that develop disciplinary and critical thinking. These questions are open, so they're open to that messiness of religion. We're not boxing up an answer for pupils. The questions allow for exploring the openness of individual worldviews within that inquiry, and having time, however you structure your unit of learning, to explore those individual worldview perspectives and differences of opinions within the worldview, and also having the time to explore the pupil's personal worldview and development. This also means learning about specific worldviews is embedded into a universal human experience. So we do this at Jigsaw through identifying bridge concepts that root the universal to the worldviews learning. That happens in the first lesson, and we return to that expression of personal development in the final lesson. This expression also encourages a consideration of how the worldview learning is going to have a lasting impact on the personal worldview of each child. Contextualising worldviews learning helps to make it not abstract and something that we're not going to encounter. So this might be through developing a local or global understanding of the religions through authentic pictures, maps, statistics, so grounding the abstract concept of the organised worldview that might be unknown in its actual lived experience. Experience, we're exemplifying what we might mean by the case studies within your curriculum. So essentially we're making the concept of a believer of a worldview more concrete. So particularly if a child is possibly not likely to meet someone of that faith in their own life presently, but would do in the future. So we're presenting that learning through maybe photos of real people. We've got graphics of a diverse range of people, making sure you invite visitors in. You can see examples here of a newspaper article, so it's making it real life. You can see that it's speech and thought bubbles that are being used rather than facts next to a picture for real and diverse images to reinforce that this is a lived experience and it's not an abstract concept of religion or worldviews. There on diversity. So this is another element of a worldviews approach, and this includes making sure you have diverse voices and representation, and that will come from drawing on individuals and personal views and allowing those to be different and unique and authentic. We have diversity across worldviews, so including non-religious worldviews, making sure you've got a range of different worldviews that you teach about. But we're also thinking about diversity within those organised worldviews through thinking about different denominations, groupings, schools of thought. And obviously, we can't do everything all the time, but if you can find the opportunities to allow for those moments, that will be really powerful. Opening up to the idea of interpretation and including diverse interpretations, so that we understand that within a worldview there might be different interpretations. For example, Christians that believe that the creation story is an absolute true account, and those that believe the creation story is a representation. So knowing that there's that diversity within the thoughts of that organised worldview. When we're thinking about interpretation, then there's also the opportunity to consider hermeneutics, so the interpretations of stories and how that impacts the individual and personal worldviews being explored in the classroom. Again, reinforcing there's no one way to read this, there's no one way to practice this, no one way to believe this. Countering those misconceptions, generalizations, misrepresentations through the approach to presenting these stories, not the content of the stories themselves. Is to plan in time to explicitly talk to the children about the idea of different lenses and people having a different worldview, so how people see the world through different lenses based on their experience, and building those core values of compassion and empathy and tolerance and respectful disagreement through explicitly discussing the fact that our worldviews are all built around different experiences and planning those opportunities into your curriculum.
We have picked out 5 key areas for all staff teaching RE to be aware of in developing a worldviews approach. Firstly, it's important that they feel confident in facilitating open discussions which allow for difference whilst being inclusive, respectful and tolerant. Our Jigsaw Class Charter supports this and can be used in both RE and PSHE lessons. Staff should know it's okay not to know it all, but feel confident in the sources of information they are using. This is why we provide a teacher script for our lessons, and we have the OWL crew, which can be used as a distancing tool to allow the teacher time to go away and then come back to the class with any additional information that they've required for the next session. Personal worldview means about being conscious of the unconscious within your own worldview, perspective and bias, and it's an important step for staff to make. They need to be aware of their own positionality as well as that of the pupils in the classroom and what the contexts and influences for them might be. Careful use of language is something that we looked at earlier with the Ofsted Research Review, for example using some, many or most rather than all, and other generalizations. Other sentence terms include one interpretation is or in some contexts. And finally, it's important to include diversity within worldviews through interpretations, images, practices that are shared with the children, and we provide resources that do just this. And now let's take a look at those 5 steps from a child's point of view. We would like them to participate in discussions and feel confident and safe to do so, to develop that respectful and inclusive attitude. When thinking about sources of information, it's important that they start to question and understand where that information has come from, how it was written, and then how things are used and interpreted now. From a personal worldview, recognising the prior knowledge and any misconceptions they might bring to the classroom, as well as reflecting on how what they've learnt is going to impact their view of the world moving forward. Again, that careful use of language, some, many, most, rather than the generalisations. I think, but others might think. And also recognising diversity again, starting to question and ask for different images and practices, and understanding that just because someone follows the same organised worldview as someone else, they're probably going to have their own way of doing it.
Finally, we're going to consider what you could do as a school leader to share the worldviews approach in your school, build on it and embed it. We realise that schools will all have different areas of focus and development, and you may have different elements of the worldviews approach in your curriculum already. The first thing you're going to want to do is determine your timescale and select the elements of the worldviews approach you are going to focus on in that timescale. In order to make those choices manageable and sustainable, you're going to need to consider the wider demands on the subject's development and on your staff workload. This includes thinking about what whole school targets you're going to need to implement in RE and across the curriculum this year. So how much space realistically do you and your staff team therefore have to also think about a worldviews approach? If you're a school that's just taken on a new scheme, like Jigsaw RE, do you need to focus on familiarity with that teaching approach before digging deeper into a worldviews approach and being aware of where that worldviews approach comes into that scheme? Then we need to think about how many elements of the worldviews approach are you going to select to make sure it's manageable and, importantly, it's sustainable. Once you've made that decision, which is the explore phase on this cycle of implementation, you'll want to think about how this change will be implemented, and you might have methods of that in your school: staff meetings, demonstrations, CPD, coaching, learning communities. And how will it be monitored in order to assess your next steps when you're ready to enter a sustain phase, when you're thinking through sustain and into considering a whole new element of the approach to add in, or even making sure you know when we need to take a step back or pause part of this to be able to focus in on something else. In order to support you in sharing about a worldviews approach, maybe in a staff meeting, and getting that buy-in from your staff, that understanding of why this approach is important, and that shift to a worldviews approach is important, we have created a staff meeting PowerPoint that is ready to go. So it includes some of the information that we've been through in this session, but also has a couple of activities in it that will help to see why a worldviews approach is important. It also has some kind of quick win ideas, and then space for you to add in and share your own action planning for your school. The two activities included in the staff meeting are the RE River, which looks at the video from Theos Think Tank and has a purpose to encourage reflection and a deeper understanding of personal worldviews as part of a worldviews approach, and how the personal worldviews of your staff may impact the way that they teach RE and their understanding of it. And the second activity is a true or false quiz. And the purpose of this is to kind of highlight some of the generalizations, misconceptions, language used that have an impact on a worldviews approach, and just open up that idea.
Now, some of you might find that your school is further ahead on their worldviews journey than others, and that's absolutely fine. So what we wanted to finish with some ideas for next steps. So this is a process that isn't just a one-off staff meeting. You will need to continue to review and refine what it looks like in your school. So once you've done your initial introduction, you're going to think about how you're going to embed or sustain all that brilliant work that you've started. How can you make sure that all staff have the same understanding? How do you know that? How can you support them to provide a consistent approach in all of the classrooms for all of the year groups? Are there any new staff, for example, who are joining you, and how are you making sure that they are on the same page? Do any of your staff have any particular subject knowledge development needs, and what CPD can you provide for that? How can you, as subject leader, provide monitoring strategies to ensure that the impact is what you would like it to be? How are you going to use pupil voice, perhaps, as one of the tools to do this? Or what would you expect to see in the children's books or floor books or learning journals? And how can you use in your school further development time to review the journey? Can you use strategies such as peer and self-review? So making sure that you have a clear picture of what is happening and then some next steps you can take. So looking at the further developing, this would be the EEF model of explore and prepare. You might pick a particular area of the worldviews approach to focus on. You could look beyond your school and start to develop links with local faith communities for trips or visitors coming into your school. Think about how you're sharing what you're doing with parents and carers to engage them with the learning. This will probably be a very new approach to RE for them. Are you going to recognise festivals and celebrations from a wider range of worldviews? And you could do this in the newsletter and assemblies for worldviews that aren't necessarily part of your curriculum map. There are audit tools and competitions that you can enter to really celebrate everything that you're doing with your brilliant RE work, such as the RE Quality Mark, and some local SACREs have a WIRE award, widening inclusion in RE. And are you making sure that this positive representation of different faiths, beliefs, cultures and worldviews is evident throughout the curriculum and throughout your school, not just in RE and not just in RE lessons? Thank you for your time for this webinar today. If you have any questions or would like suggestions for further resources and support materials, you can either contact us through our Jigsaw RE community group on Facebook if you're a subscriber school, or you can email jigsawrementor@jigsawEducationGroup.com. Finally, we'd really appreciate it if you could scan the QR code or use the link there for the website to just give us a little bit of feedback about how you found the training session today, so you can make sure that we are providing the information and support that really helps you. Bye.